Okay. Thank you all for coming, listening to me talk about the South Carolina Department of Education and the Education Accountability Act to alter it so that schools are not receiving extra benefits for their state testing scores. So I'm sure when you drive around Columbia, you can picture the differences in the neighborhoods. I recently did a Meals on Wheels trip and I saw a lot of neighborhoods in the back parts of Columbia, and they were really sad to see, and some were really nice, and the differences were crazy. And then also walking down Main Street where I live, there's a large population of homeless people. Um, and it does kind of just make you wonder what causes poverty, and a large part of that is actually education. It seems pretty straightforward, but 25% of Americans suffering from poverty have no further education than a high school diploma, and only 4% have a bachelor's degree or higher. So you see that jump, and it really just shows how important education is in a child's development and then even into adulthood, your future. And then when families can't rely on a stable income, having food, paying bills, it inflicts trauma onto their children and makes it harder for them to perform in the way that a child would, but it creates a very difficult cycle to leave. I grew up in a rural town in New Jersey, and I went to a high school that consisted of three different towns. Two of them were mostly upper middle class, very comfortably living people, and then the third was lower class. And you had some middle class people in there, but then the differences were a lot more vast in that town. There were some people whose parents were into drugs, there were some children who were into drugs, there were people that were in and out of foster care, and then there were even some people that immigrated from other countries that didn't have documents or speak English. So very, very vast differences between some towns and others in my high school. And it was very eye-opening to see. And most kids that were well off went to a four-year university, a lot of them out of state, and then some people didn't even go to college. And then in that group, some did not graduate high school, and then in that group, some fell to drug use, and it was very, very sad to see. Education plays a huge role in the formation of a child's life, and it should not be funded differently because of a school's overall state testing scores. I'm encouraging the South Carolina Department of Education, specifically Amy Hornsby, to change the Education Accountability Act so that the state testing results will not harm the funding that the student's education receives. There are a lot of different reasons why this is really important, but two of them are just because we want to decrease poverty in South Carolina. And then you also want to ensure that all children feel that they're worthy of the education that they're receiving and not penalize those who are disadvantaged. According to the United States Census, 21.3% of people under the age of 18 suffer from poverty. That's over a fifth of the population of children in the entire state of South Carolina. None of them can control the circumstances they're born into, and this rate has been climbing. Additionally, there's been a 60% rise in drug use, and that is among people in their early teenage years. And that just shows the correlation between education, poverty, and drug use. It's just really sad to see how fast these rates are climbing. So decreasing poverty and is really important to you. In order to begin the decrease in these rates, we need to ensure that children have the proper education, opportunities to get involved in their communities, and the proper support within those communities. According to a journal published by UNESCO, which is an organization with an extensive background in studying educational justice, educational performance is strongly tied to home background. Factors like parental education, economic status, stability, and general home environment all play very large roles in how well a child develops and how educated they become. With that being said, some children don't have at-home reinforcement and fully rely on their school's education quality and reinforcement there. I saw children come to school that didn't know how to take care of themselves. They were not hygienic, and it was very, very sad to see because that was their normal. No, they didn't have people to teach them how to do that. They were fully relying on what they knew at a very young age, which is not much. Allocating more money to better performing schools gives resources to people that don't receive the maximum benefit. You're not closing the gap between those people where they have the parents and the family to teach them how to live as a child. And then you have the children that don't have that. And if you allocate more funds to the people that have those resources, you're just setting somebody on a good foot off better, and you're setting somebody off on a bad foot worse. Obviously, nothing can 100% fix the factors that lie beyond the school grounds, but ensuring that children have the best education possible and the most resources is what gives them the chance of breaking the cycle of poverty, and money does make a huge difference in all of that. As I mentioned before, my high school consisted of three very different elementary and middle schools that were funded very, very differently. My school experienced the loss of a student, and they had not only hired more guidance counselors on, but they had hired a school psychiatrist, so a licensed psychiatrist with more certifications and more experience for student support after that loss. And that really tremendously helped the student body. For comparison, there were some losses in the other lower income school as well, but those students did not receive proper support. And then I remember overhearing teachers talking about those students going into high school and the behavioral issues that were arising and how people were having these outbursts. And it was just very, very different the way that it was handled and then the outcomes of those children's, because experiencing a loss at that age really does kind of change a lot for you. And it caused a lot of turmoil for those children. And then it carried into the high school levels. So child development is fact. When kids don't have the resources to navigate their emotions or have a stable life, other areas will suffer a lot of insufficiencies. Common examples of students' personal lives taking a toll on their education are sleeping during class, missing homework, skipping class, behavioral outbursts, poor hygiene, and so many more signs. And by providing schools equal funding to equip all students with a safe place to learn with ample resources, you're tremendously improving the outlook of their lives. Funding can provide extra accessibility for students that are struggling, and teachers can monitor performance and have an easy way to offer support to those kids that isn't taking up their own time or money. Education administration public, more equal funding, better outcomes. There's growing up around it, it's a side thing, it's a side thing, locations. It just adds a lot of unnecessary stress and a lot of turmoil. And no child deserves to feel like the quality of education is in their hands when they're trying to grow up. When their standardized testing scores determine a school's funding, you're showing these students that their circumstances outside of that school can define them. Although other factors can contribute to the outcome of a student's success in school, the allocation of funds should never be the thing holding them back. When considering making this change, think about the children that feel unworthy, suffer difficult circumstances at home, and those who want to break the cycle of poverty. Now that you understand the relationship between money allocation and student success, please consider allocating funds equally, not rewarding those who are already set up to do well. Thank you for listening. Does anybody have any suggestions or thoughts?
Yeah, I was wondering, so under my impression was that like taxpayer dollars versus like from the different counties is like kind of what influences the school's funding. I was wondering like how you would like combat having equal funding through different counties that have different incomes like per capita and like try to make it equal without like making the citizens angry.
Absolutely. No, that makes total sense. It's not necessarily about making it completely equal. It's more in a circumstance where you have multiple districts within one county with such vast income differences that
Hmm.
it's not benefiting one school versus another. I went to a high school that was, like I said, like very, very different and very like there were polar opposites. And then even outside of my direct district, that county had a lot more differences that were even broader. We had a lot of private schools, but then we also had probably one of the wealthiest schools in the state of New Jersey in my county as well. So the difference between that school and the high school that I went to and the elementary and middle school that like the pipeline to that was so different, and they're 20 minutes apart. So it's not necessarily about the state as a whole, it's more about the individual schools within a county. Obviously, you can't do much about tax. Can't take a lot and then just give it to another person because that's not going to make everybody happy, but then when you have so many people in one area and you have such a vast difference, it's more performing better. It's more about taking that money and splitting it up equally.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Anybody else? That's all. Guess I'll go again. So another thing I had to say. So like so where I'm from, it was like six elementary schools, two middle schools, except the two middle schools were like completely different like people in them. So it'd be like the rich kids, and then it'd be like the country kids that like I guess had like lower income, and they had like completely different views on life. And then we had one high school, and that's where like they all clashed. But it was all under like
Mm-hmm.
one like school district. So I was wondering if like that's kind of what you were like talking about, how like the counties like kind of differ from each other and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's definitely very much in line with what I was kind of approaching. And I mean, like, obviously, I'm not from South Carolina, but just seeing it's kind of not specific to one region. You just said
Hmm.
it's kind of similar to that in your area. There are definitely a lot of areas like that. I mean, even Columbia, you have the university at the center, and then you drive to the stadium, and 5 minutes behind the stadium there's a tiny dirt road and houses that are completely run down and decrepit, and it's really really sad because you wouldn't ever know. And I didn't
Yeah.
know until the Meals on Wheels like drive around thing. So it's definitely more about taking resources from one town and just distributing it more equally among the students. It's not like you can't control income from their parents, you can't control those situations, but like when it comes to a public education especially, I think that public is public, and if you're sending your child to public school it should be like standard just compared to every like what you can control, just because I mean ultimately these kids that go to these public schools are potentially going to go to colleges, they're going to go to grad school, they're going to enter the working world. So if you have a large group of people that are significantly more prepared because of their high school education or just like the resources that they had there versus a group of people that doesn't have that, you're kind of setting them up because they already live in an area where that's not widely available,
Hmm.
and you're setting them back maybe not further, but you're keeping them stagnant. And I think that's more the problem is you don't want to keep a group of people that are behind at a stagnant spot and then have a group of people that are further ahead continuing to move further ahead with resources that could really really change somebody's life.
Gotcha. Cool.
Anybody else have anything? Okay.
No.